I wanted to look in here and see what we could find today. Oh yeah. Let's play with some swords. One of my all-time favorite weapons is the straight sword, famous from Chinese movies and the old kung fu theater, black belt theater from the 60s and 70s. I love this weapon. Great weapon, fun, fun, fun. Now, even if you don't have the opportunity to have a sword, because they are difficult to get your hands on, you can order them from a few really good places online. Look at some, just search double-edged straight sword, Chinese style, or the jian, jian. Another thing you can do is just grab a simple stick and get a very similar feel of the sword with a stick. You want it to be roughly 30 inches, give or take, depending on your own size. The idea is gripping it down here at a nice balance point where there's a little bit left on the end, on the little finger side. If you're holding it in what's a reverse grip, you want it to be up about ear height, up above the shoulder with the arm long. So you can see the sword is a good size. That's about where I would want the stick to be. A shorter stick works as well. And then you can save up and get the double-edged straight sword. So first off, let's just go over the parts of these, what it's called. And if you notice, the scabbard is pretty ornamental. It's really beautiful. And it just protects the sword from rusting and having any issues from the weather. You'll notice this sword has some etching on it and some really interesting detail. The other side as well. So a lot of times the swords would be etched and decorated after the process of hammering them out. And so the etching shows the way you hold it. And you wouldn't think there's an up or a down, but these swords there are. So you would hold it so that if you were holding it in a regular kind of a pistol grip type of action, then the legs of the creature or the writing on it would be facing downward. That means that this edge on the bottom where the legs of the dragons are, it's the dragon on one side and a phoenix on the other. The legs, the downward part, that edge is called earth. So if I say hit down with earth, you're slicing down with earth, or cut up with earth, you're cutting up with that bottom edge, meaning the feet of the animals are here. The top edge is called heaven. So the earth edge points down to earth. The top edge is the one up to heaven. You could be blocking with heaven or blocking with earth. You could be cutting across with heaven, slicing down with earth, cutting up with earth, or cutting up with heaven. So it helps in the teaching aspect, way to give good directions, and everybody, after a little bit of practice, you can figure out which edge is which. The tip is called the sovereign, and both tips, this is a secondary sovereign at the pommel, and the pommel is often a solid piece of brass to help with the weight. You want the sword to be nice and light so that it can be wielded really easily, and not too forward heavy, not too bulky, not too heavy, so that it doesn't wear you out, but you could use it all day long. It's more of a precision tool than a big, strong hacking tool, like what the broadsword would be. This one is more like the surgical one, where you would go in and nick into soft areas, or thrust real quickly into the body, hit into the wrist or the ankles or up into arteries inside the groin or under the arms. It's more of a precision tool, where the hacking tool, like the broadsword, is more for breaking bones, hacking off limbs, doing a lot of more major damage. The thing that's beautiful about this is any of the weapons teach connectivity of the body. You're not just swinging an arm and hacking like this, but it's a whole body flow, especially with the Tai Chi practice of the sword. The blood cup in here is called the parent or the guardian, which is just protecting your hand from getting wet and slick. And then the handle is called the master, where the practitioner connects with the sword, and the skills of the sword and the skills of the practitioner combine into one, and you create art. So just like a paintbrush, like a scalpel, you get the mixture. However good the sword is, limits the practitioner. However good the practitioner is, limits what the sword can do. So with all that, we're ready to dive into some practice with the double-edged straight sword. Notice when doing this, the other hand is always holding a particular mudra as well. So not only is the elegance of the straight sword happening, but some of the mysticism of the Taoists and the philosophy of the Chinese is in there as well. This is called the sword hand, sword fingers. The sword fingers, the two fingers gently extended and lightly touching, the other two fingers curled under, not in a fist, but just curled gently under, and the thumb gently touching the knuckle here. And this hand, they would use it for striking into pressure point areas, but it's also used to help keep the hand just like in Eskrima or Kali or Arnis. The other hand is doing different things to help keep it out of the way so that it's not getting cut by your own sword. And it's also helping to balance the efficiency of the movement of this weapon so that you're lending torque specific ways and power specific ways for it to be more efficient and more useful. So the opposite hand is always in the sword fingers, and it's basically a very similar position to how the hand actually holds the sword. Instead of having a death grip on the sword is kind of cradled in this position here, and you use a lot of gentle squeezing in the first two fingers to get little flicks and little extra movements, the wrist, and a lot of different moves like that in order to just create a little more whip and torque and stuff like that in the sword. To care for the sword, once you've got a nice sword that's worth taking good care of, you want to do a light coat of oil, thin oil, onto the sword to help keep it from rusting. If it does develop any rust, you can spritz it with water and rub like aluminum foil on it. If that doesn't take it off, you got to go to a little more drastic measures, the same way that you would clean a gun with some kind of solvent. Rub it out with a little bit of really, really fine grit sandpaper. If you buy a really high-end sword from a well-known sword maker like Cold Steel or somebody like that, ask them for ways to maintain the sword, and they've probably got kits and things like that to take care of them as well. So the scabbard also needs a little bit of oil so the wood nit does not dry out, and you can just put it in a bucket and literally pour oil into it just a little bit, let it drain down further and further. That also helps keep a nice sheen of oil on the sword. Even if you're stuck at home and all you have is a stick, it's still a lot of fun to step through the movements of a straight sword form with the stick. So, be well, and I will see you soon.